Did you know South Park: The Stick of Truth was almost never released? The game had an awful development timeline with endless delays, censorship issues, and a publisher that went bankrupt. This is the story of how we almost never got South Park: The Stick of Truth.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
South Park is one of the most prolific television series of all time, spanning 26 seasons and 327 episodes. That level of success will often lead to many other forms of media and merchandising spin-offs such as movies, toys, clothing, and of course, video games. Despite South Park being one of the most consistently great shows on television, they had never quite figured out how to convert that to a game. In fact, South Park is infamous for having some of the worst video games ever made. From 1998 to 2000, there were 3 South Park video games released, those being South Park Chef's Love Shack, and South Park Rally. All of these games were panned by critics, with the highest average aggregate review score of any of these games being a measly 67% for South Park on Nintendo 64. These games were an extremely poor representation of the South Park franchise, with many of them being borderline unplayable due to technical issues. It's obvious that whoever was in charge just had no idea how to properly convert South Park into a video game, and so for many years they stopped trying altogether. There was, however, a slight resurgence for South Park video games that came before Stick of Truth that many don't even know about. There were 2 South Park games released for the Xbox Live Arcade in 2009 and 2012. The first, South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play, was a simple tower defense game that played similarly to a game like Bloons. The game was extremely basic, as you may expect from an Xbox Live Arcade game, but it worked, and it was the first time a South Park game wasn't immediately ripped to shreds by anyone who played it. There was one more South Park game to release on Xbox Live Arcade, called Tenderman's Revenge. This one was a 2D platformer and even had 4-player multiplayer similar to New Super Mario Bros. Wii. However, the reception of this one was a bit more mixed, and most people don't even know it exists. The point is, South Park has had a rocky history with video games. Looking at these 5 South Park games, it's clear there was never much of a budget behind them, and the show's creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone never played a very large role with any of these games. For the most part, they had no role at all other than just their voice acting. For fans of South Park, it was extremely disappointing to see these constant failed video games, especially when rival shows like The Simpsons were able to make some all-time classics. However, all of that was finally about to change with South Park: The Stick of Truth.
Thank you so much. Christ has really blessed us with talent. Yeah.
Matt and Trey had grown tired of seeing these awful South Park games hit the market, so they took matters into their own hands. In 2009, they got in touch with Obsidian Entertainment. Obsidian, known for making some of the highest quality RPGs on the market, may seem like a bit of an odd choice for a South Park game. Why them of all people? Well, Trey had a vision for a South Park role-playing game and felt Obsidian would be the best team to make that happen. Their primary goal with this game was to make it feel and look like an episode of South Park. Many of the other South Park games had gone so poorly because they were always trying to convert it to 3D instead of just sticking with the iconic South Park aesthetic. Another key aspect would be that the player was not going to control any of the 4 boys. Instead, they would create their own character. This character would be known as the New Kid and could be customized to look however you wanted. This could theoretically allow you to create yourself in the style of South Park, which was such a cool idea and something that I'm sure many South Park fans have dreamed of. The character would be silent, a decision Trey made because he doesn't like when the main character of a video game talks for you and says something that you wouldn't have said. The game would have a fantasy setting based around a game that the kids are playing. This was the perfect idea for a video game, not only because it fits the RPG genre, but because it allows you to have a lot of freedom with the storytelling and gameplay. Essentially, anything could happen, and it could all just be explained by the kids imagining it in their game. This also allowed for that iconic South Park absurdity where whatever the kids are imagining starts to combine with things actually happening in their real life. As for the gameplay, it would be very similar to something like Earthbound and Paper Mario, both games Trey stated he was taking inspiration from. Trey remembered playing Earthbound and the way you start off as just a kid in your house, but before you know it, the game has you fighting off dangerous enemies. He thought that concept fit well for South Park since most of the episodes follow this same structure of things starting small and progressively getting more and more insane. The battle system would be turn-based like Earthbound, however it would be more interactive, closely resembling Paper Mario. All of the initial planning of the game was extremely promising. The passion and determination from Matt and Trey, combined with the talent of Obsidian, was looking like a match made in heaven. It seemed like South Park fans were finally going to get a video game they could be proud of.
I need to get an erection for my dad.
Very funny, boys. Go on, beat it.
Development did not go smoothly for the Stick of Truth. Matt and Trey have admitted they underestimated the intricacies of creating a video game. As stated previously, their primary goal of this game was to make it look exactly like an episode of South Park. That may sound easy due to South Park's simplistic art style, but in practice, it was much harder. As Matt put it, "You would not believe how many hours went into making that distinctive South Park crappy look. It was a major collaborative effort between Obsidian and South Park Studios to perfect the look." At the same time, Matt and Trey struggled to adjust to game development. It wasn't as linear as creating a show or a movie. For example, they realized early on that they had never actually thought about South Park as a town and how it all came together. Meaning they had never considered where Cartman's house is or where Kyle's house is. They had never considered how far the school was from their houses. And of course, with this game, the player would have to walk from point A to point B. You couldn't just cut to wherever you wanted to go like in the show. So they spent a lot of time just trying to map out South Park in a way that not only made sense for the show, but also in a way that would be fun and engaging for players. Another issue they ran into was that making humor for a video game was much different than making humor for a television show. A recurring joke or theme can be consistently funny for a 22-minute episode. It could even continue to be funny over the course of an hour-and-a-half long movie. But games can be 5, 10, 15, or 20 plus hours long. It's a lot harder to keep jokes fresh. They also wanted to keep the topical humor South Park is known for, but again, this proved more difficult because jokes that may have been funny in 2011 were not necessarily still relevant after 2 more years of development time. This is in stark contrast to how Matt and Trey typically make South Park. For those unaware, most South Park episodes are created in just 6 days. They are literally working on the episode right up until the deadline where it airs on television. There is a fantastic documentary titled 6 Days to Air that can be found on YouTube if you're interested in learning more about this process. This 6 days to air model is quite different from their video game that was in development for nearly 5 years. Prolific game developer Tim Kaine, who worked as a programmer on the Stick of Truth, has a YouTube video detailing his experience with the game. And in that video, he touched on the fact that Matt and Trey would often cut things at the last second or want major things changed after a lot of work had already been done. Matt and Trey struggled to adjust to this new release schedule because they would hear the same jokes over and over again and get tired of them. This caused understandable frustration for the developers who would have their work thrown out simply because Matt and Trey suddenly changed their minds. According to Tim, entire levels that were fully finished ended up cut, and in his opinion, a lot of funny stuff was lost due to this decision making. Despite all of these complications, the game was looking extremely promising. In the beginning, Stick of Truth was almost entirely funded by South Park Studios, as they didn't want to worry about any publisher coming in and censoring things. But eventually they managed to land a publishing deal with THQ, allowing the game to grow and scale. It received its first major round of press at E3 2012, officially unveiling the name and concept to the world. Even though we primarily only had interviews accompanied by some cutscenes, you could see the game was on the right track, and you could feel the passion Matt and Trey had for the game, which was so refreshing to see. South Park fans were overjoyed that a true South Park game would finally be coming out, and they wouldn't have to wait long, with the game being given a release date of March 5th, 2013.
Well, that sucks.
This is the point in our story where just about everything that could go wrong went wrong. The first setback came in March 2012 when Microsoft canceled one of Obsidian's other games in development, codenamed North Carolina. This resulted in layoffs across Obsidian, including members of the Stick of Truth team. The Stick of Truth team was already fairly small to begin with, so this was a major setback, and that was just the beginning. In December 2012, THQ filed for bankruptcy. THQ initially claimed they only did so in order to restructure, and that Stick of Truth development would continue normally. However, THQ didn't find a buyer and was forced to sell off their assets, including South Park: The Stick of Truth. THQ began auctioning off the rights to The Stick of Truth before Obsidian was even aware it was happening. Meanwhile, the South Park team was understandably furious. They did not feel THQ should have the authority to sell the rights since it was under the South Park license. This led to a legal battle between South Park Studios and THQ, all taking place in January 2013, just 2 months before the game was supposed to be released. Everything was up in the air at this point, and it was unclear if the game would ever even be released. Matt and Trey are famous for their particularity, and it was unknown if they would be willing to work with another publisher. There was a legitimate fear amongst fans that South Park: The Stick of Truth would be cancelled. In the end, the publishing rights were purchased by Ubisoft. Fans were happy to know the game had been saved, but were very very concerned by this new publisher. Ubisoft does not have a good reputation in the gaming community, and fans immediately prepared for a delay in order to introduce all of Ubisoft's controversial business practices such as DRM and Uplay. There was also a worry that Ubisoft may be less receptive to some of the more controversial elements of the game. Other fans held out hope that the game would be unaffected, as it was already so close to launch. The game was probably mostly complete. In the end, the game did receive a delay, getting pushed all the way back to March 4th, 2014. After Ubisoft acquired the game, they felt it was not ready for release and needed to be moved back. According to reports, Matt and Trey agreed, admitting they had gotten a bit in over their heads with their original vision. After this, the game continued on track towards its new release date, with things seemingly going smoothly, but there was one final setback coming for the Stick of Truth: censorship. Matt and Trey's biggest fear was going to come true. There were a variety of reasons why certain content was being censored, and each region seemed to have different restrictions on what could or couldn't be shown. In some regions, the console versions were affected, but the PC version was not. Other regions banned full scenes regardless of platform. Meanwhile, other versions of the game were completely untouched, such as the North American version. This was another moment where everything could have gone wrong for the Stick of Truth. The game was supposed to release in just a few months. There was no time to rework these scenes, especially because some of them were pivotal plot points. It wasn't just one random joke that could be cut. I have to imagine at this point there were some serious conversations about potentially delaying the game again, or maybe even not releasing the game in certain regions. However, that didn't happen. In typical Matt and Trey fashion, they just rolled with it. The censored scenes would cut to a description of what was going to happen, accompanied by an image making fun of the region that had banned it. My personal favorite is the Australian version, which features a crying koala. Ultimately, I think this was the best way to go about it. The game really could not afford another delay, and with all of the different regions requiring different things for different platforms, it would have been way too complicated to try and figure out what could or couldn't stay. I'm sure Matt and Trey were pretty upset by this, and it does really suck for the players in those regions who didn't get to experience the full game. However, Matt and Trey were able to turn a very negative situation into a great joke for the player, and at the end of the day, the goal of South Park has always been to make you laugh by any means necessary.
Dude, it would take a miracle to finish this thing. Now don't go saying that. There's always hope. Miracles happen most every day.
After 5 grueling years of development, a legal battle, 2 different publishers, and a censorship pushback, the Stick of Truth finally released on March 4th, 2014. And through what I can only describe as a miracle, the game is absolutely phenomenal. I'm a huge South Park fan, so playing this game was truly a dream come true. It was everything I had ever wanted from a South Park video game. The ability to explore the town of South Park in a way never before possible was incredible. There was an endless amount of fan service and references here, all of which brought a huge smile to my face constantly. However, the Stick of Truth is so much more than just a fan service game. Even if you are someone who has never watched a South Park episode before, you will still enjoy this game. And to me, that's what's most impressive about the Stick of Truth. This is a legitimately good RPG, albeit on the simpler side. The Paper Mario style gameplay fits perfectly, and the world is a blast to explore for new or old fans. The Stick of Truth is truly one of my favorite games of all time. I almost never replay games, but I have played through the Stick of Truth 3 times. And after re-downloading it to get footage for this video, I can feel that itch again for a 4th playthrough. Somehow, through all of the trials and tribulations, Matt and Trey, alongside the Obsidian team, were able to deliver a South Park games that fans had once only dreamed of. I am so grateful that this game was able to overcome its many setbacks and release in such an amazing state. It's a true testament to South Park and its creators. It's no wonder they've been on the air for nearly 30 years.